れこそ理解できませんよ。美味しかったんだ。
And just like that, September's passed us by. If there's anything I can take away from this season, it's the fact that it's been quite action-packed. This season gave us a number of action series, and with them came some amazing fights. So here are some of my favourite fights of the season. Let's go. Let's just say that Star Wars has had quite a tumultuous run in recent years. I wouldn't say that the franchise is marred with controversy per se, but the last few movies have been quite polarizing now, haven't they? Well, the newest chapter to the saga, an anime out of all things, seems to set things up to an upswing. Star Wars Visions has debuted to a very positive response, and it has a lot to do with how each episodic chapter carries some interesting story potential. Among those, The Ninth Jedi is my favorite one by far. It really captures the classic Star Wars feel the most amongst the episodes, and I wouldn't really mind it being a launchpad into an entirely new series. Oh, and there's that amazing fight with Siths versus Jedis. I love it simply for the high speed, frantically choreographed action that I've come to love the franchise for. In a little over just a minute, it also showcased some of the best of Star Wars battles. You have the quick one-shot, the usage of force powers and lightning, and the very fast-paced dances that are the lightsaber battles. A lot of people consider this episode the best one in the series, and it's not hard to see why. At times, first impressions are everything. That's all you need to get a legion of anime fans following your show weekly. If you're asking me for the best first impression of the season, I'd easily give it to The Detective Is Already Dead. Things opened with a bang in the show's pilot episode, featuring an amazingly animated fight between Siesta and Gomori. Everyone was raving about this fight and its animation, but in terms of narrative placement, I also like it very much. It gives us a glimpse of what to expect out of the show, and that it's a mystery show with a healthy amount of fighting and dashes of supernatural. It's a blend of genres that the show prides itself on, and while it may seem that the anime team blew their effort and budget in the first episode of the show, I'd say this fight allowed the show to get off on the right foot. We proceed with Luffy versus Ulti.
海賊王になるのはカイドウ様に決まってんだろ。
En route to its landmark 1000th episode, One Piece gave us a treat with a recent fight. Ulti's no slouch, and despite the hype that Luffy gets with his newfound powers, Ulti still puts up a fight that has him on the ropes. Punches were thrown, hakis clashing. It's definitely not as hype as some of the major boss fights in One Piece history, but we're talking over 2 decades of anime here. The fight is still pretty damn good as a standalone. Always love seeing Luffy in action, and I say that he really works well in these short but sweet duels. And of course, Yamato's entrance at the end. I feel like Toei absolutely nailed the Thunder Bagua scene. Next on the list is Ganme vs Mobu. Why is everyone sleeping on Kingdom again? Why, when it's got spectacular action and intense battles like this one? I know the show has had its share of fans, but I feel that it's always this underappreciated show that deserves a lot more fans. Perhaps the whole Dynasty Warriors setting is quite niche, just like Sengoku Basara during its heyday, but Kingdom is much more than that. We expect a lot of army battles in something like this, but the fight that stole the show for me is Ganme vs Mobu from the current season. Standing ahead of their respective armies, the two combatants engage each other on horseback, none giving anything to the other. I just love the intensity in this fight. There's not much visual eye candy that we've been spoiled with thanks to UFO Table and Mappa, but the fight more than makes it up with intensity and the level of gravity thanks to the music and the slow panning shots. It's just one of those gritty, tense battles that can even stand to be a bit bloodier to drive the point home. Speaking of ensemble fights, Doman vs Valhalla is really epic. Yep, this is something that I'd expect from Tokyo Revengers. Good old gang wars that have no shortage of fierce action and drama. The fights between the mob are all sorts of intense, but the camera's all focused on the meat of the action. I really find the camera cuts in their individual fights so well done. You can feel that you're part of the action by just watching and seeing how each of their fast blows gets captured in anime form, but it was Mikey's scene that stole the show for me. The tension and the drama was at an all-time high, and it looks like one of Domon's pillars finally bit the dust. Until he didn't. I got goosebumps seeing Mikey get back up and hand everyone else a whole can of ass kicking. He's down, but he's never out. And all it takes is a switch being flipped for him to go all badass and raise hell all over the enemies. Rin versus Nickel from Idaten Deities is also pretty cool. At first, I wasn't too sure what to expect from this latecomer to the season. The premise is simple enough, but I didn't think that Idaten Deities had a premise that lends itself to a lot of attention-grabbing battles. The synopsis, partially thanks to the art, reads more like a comedy with a few dashes of nice fights. Nice, but pretty standard, and not too great. I'm glad to have been proven wrong though, especially with this fight between Rin and Nickel, or should I say Rin's showcase of power. The fight looks unique compared to the rest of the roster so far in that it retains the light, cartoony appeal of Idaten Deities art. It doesn't look as crisp or modern as something like the Siesta fight that started this list. Regardless, the fight has that same appeal that those Chinese anime fights that I love so much had in that, despite the simplistic art style. It's got that wacky, cartoony feel that you might just enjoy. It feels so good to have Madoka Magica once again. The new movie looms in the horizon, and the second half of Magia Record finally kicks the plot into overdrive after what the first season left us. In particular, I really loved seeing our favourite magical girls in action again, and Magia Record does an excellent job of introducing new characters and having them work with or face off against the legacy characters. I always felt that Mami would have been a great villain, and she displays that pedigree in full glory in this fight against everyone. Her bullet hell abilities always steal the show, and fighting without restraint as a villain, it becomes even more of a treat to watch. Suruno has her own issues with the protagonist, and it's nice to see the two groups of battles converge into one chaotic display of explosions and magic. The fight also has quite the emotional backdrop to it, and while Magia Record may not have quite captured the success of its predecessor, this season 2 has more than redeemed season 1 for me. There's a lot more at stake and far better action. I featured Castlevania fights often in these videos, so I think that The Witcher deserves a mention too. It's not anime in the traditional sense, but the anime version of The Witcher has had some highlights of its own. One such highlight is Tetra vs Vesemir. While I won't say that the fight carries the entire movie and makes it an absolute must-watch, it's also an absolute treat that shows off what non-Japan animation can do. Fans also agree that Tetra is one of the great antagonists in this list that greatly expands the lore of the games. This fight really sold me to her as a character, and it felt so good seeing the two combatants go back and forth inside the cramped space amidst the fires. The Witcher anime is good supplementary material to the game and the TV show, so if you are a fan, make sure to check it out. The movie still is pretty good in its own right, so that's probably a point of consideration for you too. My Hero Academia continues rolling with Shigaraki vs Ridestro. My Villain Academia hitting all the right notes in the decisive confrontation between the two leaders of the villainous factions. A lot of people have been clamoring to see Shigaraki and Ridestro duking it out in anime form, and while that fight's been toned down, it still does manage to be a home run. Villain versus villain showdowns have always been interesting because it's a battle that you can sit back and not be too invested on one side, or it should have been. What happens is that a lot of these end up having one less bad guy for you to root for. In this case, I found myself rooting for Shigaraki, more due to how much better he is as a character for me. But none of that matters when we start seeing the fireworks fly and the city being destroyed in a clash that would put some of the previous MHA battles to shame. With two characters who have less of a moral compass duking it out, you'd expect to see carnage and destruction, and that's exactly what we got. In the end, Shigaraki stands victorious after leaving a lot of annihilation in his wake, capping off the arc that ended up being a lot more interesting than I first expected it to be when it was still in its anime form. Should I also point out that both of their powers show some similarities to Deku's and overhauls powers. Talk about irony and a callback to one of the best fights of the previous My Hero Academia season. You'd think that these slice-of-life dragons can throw it down, but here we are. Toru and Elmar just had an intense battle that could give some shonen fights a run for their money. Toru and Elmar blast each other with attacks that just make you go, wow. Seeing each blast that sends the combatants flying miles away is a joy, but I love the banter more. In-fight talking helps drives up the stakes and the intensity of a fight, and the voice actors show us a better way than expected example of that here. It also gave us a surprisingly touching scene between the combatants, which I feel is the more important takeaway here. Fights are not just all about the energy blast and the punches after all. The emotion has to be there as well. On the meta side of things, what makes this sequence so touching is that it's something created in-house in Kyoto Animation. The whole sequence is the staff flexing their skills and delivering with a product that's a lot better than what we can ask for. Shows a lot about the resiliency of one of the best studios in the industry, all things considered. In spite of the tragedy a few years ago, Kyoto Animation has come back stronger, and I find that a very wholesome thing. Coming up next is Naruto vs Ishiki. Ishiki's been having Naruto's number for the longest time. He already did the unthinkable and beat both Naruto and Sasuke, and he looks to be in the process of doing so again. This time, Naruto has a new form, but will he be able to turn the tides? We're talking about a new form in shonen anime, so what do you expect? New forms may not win all the time, but they sure look good doing so almost all the time. Baryon mode ends up being impressive, with it all allowing Naruto to bring the beat down to Ishiki, smacking him around and drawing lots of clean hits that would have taken out any lesser being. All while looking all kinds of sleek thanks to the huge makeover. It doesn't come without a price though, as both he and Ishiki will soon realize as the battle wears on. This entry is a late addition that came up as I was in the process of wrapping up the video script, but it's very worth the spot. You can really feel the impact from each of Naruto's blows, and with the rocky music keeping you pumped up, the battle is a treat to watch. Hand-to-hand combat has rarely looked this good, but the guys behind Boruto did it. The adaptation really did justice to the hype. So how would you rank these 10 fights though? I'm curious to see which one you'd put on top of a hypothetical list. If you had a great time and want more, don't forget to check out the channel for the past videos that you may have missed. After checking those out, you can head over to the members only videos and consider applying for channel membership. My Patreon is also in the description box in case you really want to help me make more amazing videos, and your help would be one of the best things I could possibly get. That's it for today's list. I hope to see you again next time, and I'll be back with more anime countdowns. See ya!